Hey guys, if everyone wants to make their way back into the speaker's room and back to your seats, I think we're going to go ahead and start just a few minutes early. Are you leaving? Good. Nice to meet you. Yeah, take care. Thank you. We'll give them a couple of minutes and then I'll... You want me to cut you off? Do what, 30 minutes? 30 minutes?
Not necessarily, because I just need to get it done in 10.
Okay.
Giving these talks is kind of like listening to a preacher at church.
Yeah.
You know, he can preach for 30 minutes, but when it's all done, you say, he could have said that in 5 minutes.
I hear you. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to give everyone about 90 seconds to get in here, and then I'm going to start. So grab those snacks and head in here, please. Okay, everyone, our next speaker, is Roger Gloe. Roger is a licensed Texas irrigator and member of the Texas Panhandle Irrigators Association. Since getting his license in 2012, he has been helping people learn about their irrigation systems. He has been a Randall County Master Gardener since 2011 and provides provides educational programs to them on efficient irrigation and drip systems. He enjoys helping homeowners learn how to use their automatic irrigation systems to water their lawns and gardens efficiently. Roger is currently serving as a member of the Environmental Task Force for the City of Amarillo, where one of their primary focuses has been developing water-saving information and programs for residents. Please welcome Roger.
Thank you. I guess I'm not used to using all this fancy equipment. My slides look a whole lot better here than what they do in my little projector that I use at most of the meetings, so thank you to the Civic Center. So the topic of my talk today is, like everybody else, is water. I know that we've had a lot of ag producers in the area, but we've also got a lot of homeowners. And so the purpose of my talk is to talk to both of you, because all the ag producers probably live in a house, a lot of them live in town, a lot of them have irrigation systems. So hopefully this will pertain to everybody in the room. Okay, first thing that I like to start out with is to talk a little bit about plants in general. You know, we don't all have an opportunity to start over from scratch when we move into a house, but if you move into a new home and a new yard and you start choosing your plants, now's the time to set the stage for what you want to do down the road. So when you design your landscape, it's best to do something like shown here on the screen. We want things with the lowest water use to the high side. I know we're here in the Panhandle and it's pretty flat, but we've got lots of areas of town that do have rolling hills, sloped yards, and can utilize some of these ideas. So lowest water plants up high, maybe plant you a tree somewhere in the middle of the slope, and then down toward the bottom is where your higher usage water plants would go. That way they collect any of the water that may run off and run downstream. So that's the ideal way if you can redesign your own yard. Another one of my things that I've noticed around town, and of course a lot of the areas of the town have been developed over the past many years, but a lot of places have developed with the concept of run off instead of run in. Look at some of the big parking lots from the big box stores and so forth. They got their parking areas, and at the end of the parking area, what do they have? Usually a berm. Sometimes it has grass on it. Sometimes it's got a few trees in it. But in most cases, it's higher than the parking lot. So where does the water go? It runs down the gutter, down the street, and hopefully into some lake someplace, but it's running off. And so I would like to see everybody think about designing things with a run-in concept instead of run-off. That way, as the water accumulates on the streets, of course, it runs into these areas and could water the plants without any supplemental water. Now, this obviously isn't in the Texas Panhandle either, but the same concept could apply. I see low spots in town where people have used their lawnmowers and run through the mud to mow the grass and the weeds that are in these low spots. So here would be another opportunity to convert those low spots into rain gardens and use it that way instead of letting the water run off. I threw in a few slides here on rainwater collection. Didn't think a lot of the previous speakers were going to talk about it, but then we had a few questions came up a couple speakers ago about rainwater collection. So this will tie in good with what they've said. And I also noticed, I believe, looks like there may be some rain barrels they're going to give away at the end of the program. So here's a nice formula that I like to use. 1 inch of rain on a square foot of roof is a little over half a gallon, 6.23. Now, if you remember earlier in the morning when Ben was talking about the size of this room, how big did he say it was? Almost a half an acre. Okay? You take the size of this roof and have 1 inch of rain. I calculated that real quick. It's 13,000 some odd gallon would come off of this roof with just 1 inch of rain. 13,000 gallon, that's the size of over 2 of those huge tanker trucks that you see go down the highway. Most of those are at least 6,000 gallon. So again, you can accumulate a lot of water from a small space of roof. You know, a lot of roofs, your houses are at least a couple thousand square feet. So again, you can generate over 1,000 gallons of water with just 1 inch of rain. Obviously, these barrels, they're not that big. Most of them only hold 50 to 60 gallon. So even if you've only got a small area of your roof that can collect water from, you could collect enough to fill that barrel with one small rain. And there's different types of barrels. You can go from the fancy ones like we've got over here, or like in the previous picture. There's one off to the right that's also a fancy one that you can hook a garden hose to. You can use those. You know, it's not going to water much of your yard, but typically people use them to water their gardens, just a small area of the garden, water your house plants and things, you know, in pots around your yard as well. They also make good sources of water for wildlife water and bird baths. And then the other thing a lot of people don't realize is that the water you collect off your roof, the pH is a whole lot better than the water that you get from the city, even though it's clean, good water. It's got the other additives to it. So it really works better when you're trying to mix your spray and your fertilizer. One note here, in this area we really don't have enough rain to support your whole house, so I don't ever recommend hooking it into your house. Some of the people down in the hill country will do that, and they can use the water from their roof to supply the water for their whole household. But if you do that, there's special considerations that have to be made, and it needs to be done by a professional there. There's just a picture of one of the options. It depends on how much money you want to spend on a system and how big you want to go. You can get up to 3,000, 4,000 gallon tanks. Typically, we want to see them either a dark color, black or brown. That keeps the UV rays from the sun from causing algae to grow. Also, you need to have them screened and covered to be sure you don't promote mosquito growth and things like that. So again, this is kind of a typical setup. You can see where the water is coming off the roof and it's collected into a pipe that's sent it to the tank. If you notice the pipe coming down the wall, that's called a first flush system. It's designed to take any dirt and debris off the roof and to let it fill that pipe rather than it go into that water tank first. And you can either take the cap off the bottom to flush it completely, or a lot of them have just a small hole to continually drop a little bit out of it to keep it flushed. So again, almost anybody can collect rainwater, almost. So a couple things as far as water conservation and water efficiency. I like to show this just to make sure everybody's clear on what conservation is. Conservation is a reduction in water loss or use or waste, and it's actually a behavioral change. So what that means, conservation is that instead of taking a 10-minute shower, you take a 5-minute shower. And I think last time we met here, I got a little sand dial thing that you could flip over and it would run for 5 minutes. You could flip it the other way the next time you took a shower, so you could tell for sure how long you were in the shower. I still carry that one around in my bag of tricks that I show, but that's conservation when you don't use water. Another example is turning the faucet off when you're brushing your teeth, or don't let the water run when you're washing the car. Use a bucket and soap and a brush, and then rinse it only with water. So those are conservation measures. Now, efficiency is where you want to get the most out of the water that you do use. So in the example of your shower, and I saw one of the booths out here have some new shower heads, they reduced the flow from maybe 3 gallons a minute to 1 gallon a minute. So that's going to make it seem like you're getting the same shower but only using 1/3 of the water. So that's efficiency. Efficiency is changing your stool out in the house. That if you've got a toilet that runs with the big tank, that when you flush it, it goes round and round and round, and finally things go down. The new ones only use like 0.6 gallon of water. They get the same job done. So that's efficiency, is when you can have a better system to get the job done. Using a high-pressure washer to wash your car only takes a couple tenths of a gallon per minute versus a garden hose that puts out 5 or 6 gallons a minute. Okay, starting to talk a little bit more into the irrigation. The oldest method out there, of course, is the hose-in method of irrigation. You stretch your hose out. You can put either impact heads on the end of it. You can put the ones that go back and forth this way, water the yard on this side and the sidewalk on this side, and the driveways and so forth. But anyway, the watering with a hose is the traditional method of doing things until we came out with sprinkler systems, automatic sprinkler systems, and that's the second one here. There was a study done by the American Water Works out of California that showed that people with an automatic watering system used almost 50% more water than the person that uses a hose-in watering system. So if you've got a sprinkler system, we want to make sure that you're running it as efficient as possible, and maybe we can reduce that down to just slightly over the amount instead of 50% more. Third type of watering system is in our drip irrigation, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. Here's a few things that I like to talk about when we're looking at water efficiency. One of the previous speakers mentioned St. Augustine grass. Fortunately, we don't have any of those, any St. Augustine in this area, but we have plenty of fescue, and fescue takes lots of water. Now, some people prefer Bermuda because it takes less water, but as a master gardener, when I've got a Bermuda yard and flower beds right next to it, that sometimes creates a problem. So, plus the fact that it stays dry most of the spring until midsummer, it finally starts to green up. So a lot of people are still set on having a nice green yard, and so they've got either bluegrass or hopefully have switched over to fescue. But when it comes to watering efficiency, you really need to decide at the beginning of the year how much water you want to put on your yard. And a lot of that depends on how you train your yard. If you train your yard that it can survive on 2 times a week during the summer months, then that's all you'll have to water. If you spoil it early in the spring and you turn your sprinklers on every day and it starts to grow really thick and tall and green, then in order to maintain that throughout the summer, you're going to have to continue to water and even water more. So decide beforehand if you want the greenest yard in the neighborhood or if you want a nice looking yard that's healthy and will still maintain its green color with less water. When's the time to water? We hope that you're watering sometime early morning before the sun gets up high enough that it causes too much evaporation. Ideally in this area, you could water any time between 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning and it's okay. Some areas they have a problem with fungus and disease and so forth if you water late at night, but it's usually dry enough here that even when you water at 10 o'clock or midnight, it will dry out, and fungus usually isn't that much of a problem. But if you think you're going to have a fungus problem, set your sprinklers so they go off at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that way they're finished before the sun comes up, and you won't lose any to evaporation. Also, water as infrequently as possible. So it's better to water a couple times a week and water deeply as to water every day. Because if you water every day, all you do is promote your root growth to be on top of the ground. So by stretching the intervals between watering time, let it stress a little bit, it causes those roots to go down and search for water instead of being on top where they think they're going to get water every day. We talked about watering early in the day. Uniformity is another thing, and I've got another slide in here, we'll talk about it later, but that's a big concern, is that you're watering the same amount on all your yard and not that you've got wet spots and you've got dry spots. The next subject there is water conservation by raising your mower height. I think almost everybody here has probably heard that you should raise your mower height when it gets hot in the middle of the summer. Well, I tell everybody that's wrong. You should do that in the beginning of the year. Again, train your grass beforehand instead of waiting till the middle of the summer. Because if you're mowing it at, say, 3 inches during the most of the year, and then in the summer when it gets hot and dry, you try to raise it up to 4, that last inch is all new growth, tender, and it's going to be a whole lot harder to keep alive as if it was maintained at 4 inches the whole year long, and it knows that that's the height it's going to be, and it's going to be a whole lot better than forcing it to grow extra tall once it does become dry. The next thing is to avoid overwatering. A lot of yards are overwatered and underfertilized. Now, it doesn't really matter if you're using commercial fertilizers, if you're using organic fertilizers or whatever, but a lot of yards could decrease their water consumption if they had a little extra fertilizer and nutrients made available to them. And of course, the last thing is monitor your rainfall, and we'll talk about some things in a minute to help you with that. Typically, a turf yard only needs about 3/4 of an inch to an inch of water per week to maintain its green color. Again, it may not be the greenest on the block, but with good practices, it could maintain a good color and survive on about an inch of water per week. The second one may be a little difficult. Don't water when the wind is blowing, but of course, obviously, when the wind's blowing, the water's not hitting the target, and you're going to be wasting some of the water. And then the last comment there is no matter how much you water, concrete doesn't grow. I hate to say it, but I see this around town in a lot of areas on a regular basis. You see sprinklers that come on and they either run too long and water starts going down the gutters, or otherwise, like on the right-hand side, you've got a geyser. Now, why they're watering in the middle of the day, I don't know, first of all, but I've seen places in town that I can go by on Tuesday, I see this geyser. I go by on Wednesday, I see this geyser. I go by on Thursday, may not on Thursday, but maybe Friday, I see it again. So again, they're overwatering, plus you can tell that they've wasted water for a long time because of all the greenness around it, and then the area where it should be covered, it's brown. So obviously, that's been broken for a while. Now, if I understand it right, with these new meters, you probably can find this out with your new meter, because if you've got your limit set that you're only going to show, maybe you use 20 gallon per minute on a normal cycle, and now all of a sudden your meter's showing that it's running 30, I would bet you, and I didn't ask Jonathan and Floyd if that's correct, but that meter will probably tell you that you've got a problem with your system, that you can set that parameter to let you know you're putting out more gallon per minute than what you typically use. So that's going to be a good feature of the new meters. Another thing, of course, with the wind blowing, sometimes you'll see this, but these are some new rotator heads that put out the small streams instead of sprays. So typically you'll have a better coverage here without as much coverage onto the sidewalks. So in this case, they were either obviously misadjusted or somebody's, run it longer than what it needed to as well. Okay, another thing that I always like to point out, that is when you look at your yard or look at your plants, a lot of people think the first thing that they need to do is put more water on. If you got a yellow plant, need to turn the water on. So they set the sprinkler to run more often. A lot of times the yellowing isn't from lack of water, but it's from lack of nutrients or disease, possibly insects. A lot of things can cause plants to turn yellow. So make sure you analyze your plants before you actually just start adding water. As a matter of fact, too much water will make a plant turn just as yellow as lack of water. Usually lack of water causes the leaves to curl, they roll up and start to turn a little bit of a color, but they usually don't turn yellow. And I always say that if you got a plant that is underwatered, it's a whole lot easier to revive it than it is if it's overwatered. A plant that's underwatered, it can look all shriveled up one day. You dump a little water on it, the next day it just pops up and looks a whole lot better. If you've got a plant that's been overwatered, by the time you think, well, maybe I'll quit watering it for a couple days, it's going to take at least a couple days for the pot to dry out. Then it's going to take at least another week for it to start recovering from the damage that's already been done to the plant. And so finally, about 2 weeks later, it starts looking better. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to err on the side of underwatering. Usually overwatering also on certain plants will cause fringes around the edge of the plants to be brown. You'll see that quite a bit on like Bradford pear trees, for instance. Some of it is a lack of iron chlorosis, but a lot of it is because they're in an area that gets too much water and the fringes of those leaves turn brown. Same way with a lot of house plants, they'll turn brown around the edges. So this is an irrigator's nightmare. We got lots of different kinds of plants, lots of different water requirements. Looks really nice on these big screens. And then it's also on a slope. So you have to design this one carefully that you put out the right amount of water and get it to the right plants when they need it. And so in most cases, a place like this should either have a drip system under it or otherwise individual emitters to each one of those plants that provide the plants with the water that they need. And we'll cover some of those. I think I went 2 there. Okay, another thing that I ask people is how long do you set your irrigation to run if you've got an automatic system? And a lot of people say, well, I set each zone to run 15 minutes. Well, how do you know 15 minutes is the right amount of time? Well, it's just what I've always set it at. I can guarantee you that the person that designed and installed that system didn't design each zone to be the same. Most of the time when you calculate your size of your pipes and the number of heads and so forth, it might show one zone needs to run 10 minutes, one might need to run 12, one 13, and so forth. So in order to see how long you need to run each of your systems, each zone, we really need to have some system to do that. And I know from time to time they give out the little rain catchment deals, look like a mini rain gauge. You can use those or tuna cans or anything to set in your yard, run it through a cycle, and just see how much water you do put out. You know, if you think you need to put out a ½ an inch of water, run it for 15 minutes and check to see if that's what you're getting. And if not, you can adjust your time up or down from there. And while you're doing that, you can also check your cans to see how uniform your coverage is. You know, do you have one can that's overflowing and one that's only half full? And if so, you've obviously got a problem with some of your spray heads or the patterns that are not putting out consistent uniformity. So the first picture shows what we'd really like to see. We want to water down to the lower depth of your roots and then shut the water off. As master gardeners, we sell soil probes, so you can check where your moisture is by using that probe to see where your water level is. What happens in a lot of cases is people overwater, as shown on the right. That extra water down below the roots doesn't do any good at all. And especially if you're watering every day, it sure doesn't do any good. Typically, if your uniformity is bad, then you have a situation like on the bottom, on the left, and all of a sudden you've got a dry spot in your yard. So when you see that dry spot, the first reaction everybody has is to crank that sprinkler back up. You know, set it from 12 minutes up to 15 or 18 and try to cover up that dry spot. Well, then when you do that, then you have an overwatering situation like on the right-hand side. So again, we want to correct the problem with the irregular uniformity and not that you overwater just to correct a dry spot. Or if nothing else, get your garden hose out and water those few dry spots that you have instead of watering the whole yard. You know, typically, dry spots are going to be along your driveway or along your sidewalk because the heat from the sun compounds more of the problems with the dry spots. And also, if you think about how your sprinklers cover an area along your sidewalk or driveway may only get covered by 2 heads versus out in the middle, there's maybe 3 or 4 heads that cover a zone. So you got 2 problems along your driveways, less coverage and the extra requirements because of the heat. Typically throughout town, most systems that you see are going to be the pop-up sprays like on the left, and they put out more of a mist pattern. And of course, with the wind blowing, it tends to go everywhere. The newer systems, and there's several businesses in town and several homeowners in town I've seen now have converted to these rotator sprays, and they put out streams of water that resist the wind. A lot of people are still putting in the pop-ups because they're cheaper with the sprays. But if you can spend just a few extra dollars now, these rotator heads normally cost close to $10 per nozzle versus only 1 or 2 on the others. But still on a yard, you're only looking at $200 maybe to convert one over and have a more efficient system. Now these only put out about a third of the water, so you have to run them longer, but again, they're so much more efficient. They put out a third of the water, you only have to run them about twice as long, so you're saving a third of your water. The top picture shows how a normal head should spray. It's got fairly large drops, and it's an even coverage of gallons per minute or gallons per inch of sod throughout the whole coverage. If you have too high a pressure that well, there's several reasons why you can have high pressure, but if the system's not designed right, you could have too high a pressure. A lot of people think when you have high pressure, it sprays out farther, but it doesn't. Since it's putting out smaller droplets, it puts out that fine mist, and you're really not spraying as far. So keep that in mind, that if your pressure's too high, don't expect it to be spraying too far, but it's going to be a small wind susceptible pattern. Low pressure, I see donuts in people's yards, and that's because of low pressure. It's watered around the head itself because it's probably leaking some out of the head anyway, but then it has a donut around it. So again, what we like to see is a head-to-head coverage where you're going from one head over to the other head with a consistent pattern. A lot of times these problems occur because people start messing with their systems. Again, when they were designed for a certain pressure and a certain size nozzle. I like to see it when people convert part of their grass into xeriscape or low maintenance plants or beds or some sort of garden like that. But in a lot of cases, they cap off heads. And especially bad when I put a dog run off the side of my house, and I had to cap off 4 heads down along the side. Well, you capped off 4 heads on the side, now you've got only 3 heads in the back, and you've got this high pressure. So again, keep that in mind as you're changing your yard over from grass to beds. Make sure that you don't overdo it and change the design of the system. Going into drip real quick. Drip system, this is kind of a typical layout of a drip system. A lot of people haven't gone to drip yet. There's a few problems putting it under grass. First of all, you can't aerate. Wouldn't do very good on your drip, even though you've got your drip buried 2 to 3 inches down, but it causes aeration problems. Some other problems with it. If you got a problem in a zone somewhere, you may not know it until the plant actually dies, because you can't see when emitters are plugged or a problem with the system. But drip system is the way to go. If you're doing a bed, this is kind of a typical drip system. You do an outline perimeter with a drip line in between. A lot of homeowners like to hook up their beds around the house to drip systems. And so this is a typical system here where you hook onto a hose bib and you run a system out on a drip line. And from there, you can run all kinds of emitters to do individual plants. Emitters come in sizes from less than a half a gallon a minute to up to 10 to 15 gallon per minute. So again, if you got different size plants and different water requirements on your plants, you can change those emitters as you run that string from here to the other end of your house. One thing to be sure that it has is, if your house doesn't have a backflow preventer already on the faucet, that you do put a backflow preventer on it to make sure if we have a water loss a pressure loss in the city system, that we don't contaminate the system. One thing I would recommend if you're going to put a system on like that, spend a few dollars on a timer, because I don't know how many times I see people that turn these things on and then 4 hours later they think, oh, I forgot to turn that off. At least this way you can turn it on, set it to run 30 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour, whatever it takes, and you know it's going to go off. If you want to get real fancy, you can get one like on the right-hand side there. It's got multiple outlets. You can set multiple programs, and this is Wi-Fi that you can do it from your smartphone. Again, there's all kinds of emitters. One thing I didn't have on there is a little piece of hose emitter like this. I like this for watering pots. Hook this into that drip line that I said you can run down the side of your house. You can make a loop like that for a small pot. It puts out a half a gallon per each emitter, and there's like 4 emitters in this one. So you're going to get 2 gallons an hour that comes out of that. If you put the same type of stuff in a bigger pot, of course it's just a bigger loop, it may have 8 emitters on it, but you can size this exactly like your pots need and water your pots with just a few minutes by turning on a timer and letting it run for 8 or 10 minutes. Again, going back to the water meters, I like to use this formula when I'm watering areas to see if I'm putting out the right amount of water. In the first example there, I've got a bed that's 160 square feet. So that's like a 4-foot wide bed across 40 feet of your front of the house. If you use the calculation that you can water 1.6 square feet with 1 inch of water, that means you only need 100 gallons of water to water that bed. So again, now you can go out and flip the lid on your meter and you can read it and watch to see when you get 100 gallon. If you ran it for 10 minutes, that's all you need to run it. If you need to run it 15, that's fine. But just check your meter and see how long it takes to run 100 gallon on that bed. And that way you know you've got an inch of water if that's what you want. These smart meters, you may not even have to go to the alley and flip the lid up. You may be able to do it on your app. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, a typical backyard, 2,400 square feet, only needs 1,500 gallon, so keep that in mind. Quickly here at the end, controllers, all different kinds of controllers. If you don't have a new one that's got some of these features, you might look into replacing one. You've got options to have multiple sets of programs, so if you want to water a certain program certain days of the week, you can change it versus, if you got drip systems versus lawn, you can change those. There's all kinds of flexibility on them. And again, the newer ones now, you can have a module hooked into it that you can control it all with your phone if you desire. And even the one on the bottom on the left-hand side, I'm not even sure if I could set that one because it didn't have any buttons on it at all. So, but a lot of the techies might like that one. So. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is the rain freeze sensors. If you hadn't been by the city's booth back there, they've got 2 different brochures back there, and both of them are really excellent. One of them is on the rain freeze sensor program. Take a look at that. There is a rebate if you have one installed on a system that was put in before 2009. You're eligible for a rebate. Anything technically, if your system's been put in after 2009, should already have it on there. And if it doesn't, it would be well worth your money to do it, because for just a few dollars, usually around $100, you can have one put on, and with the price of water as it is, it wouldn't take many times that it shuts off during a rain and you save the money that it would cost. And I like to end with this quote from Benjamin Franklin: when the well runs dry, we will know the worth of water. Thank you. Any questions?